The Russian military claimed Sunday to have carried out deadly missile strikes on barracks used by Ukrainian troops in retaliation for the deaths of dozens of Russian soldiers in a rocket attack a week ago. Ukrainian officials denied there were any casualties. The Russian Defense Ministry said its missiles hit two temporary bases housing 1,300 Ukrainian troops in Kramatorsk, in the eastern Donetsk region, killing 600 of them. Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said the strikes were retaliation for Ukraine's attack in Makiivka, in which at least 89 Russian soldiers died. The Donetsk Regional Administration said 7 Russian missiles hit Kramatorsk and 2 more hit Konstantinivka, without causing any casualties. It said an educational institution, an industrial facility and garages were damaged in Kramatorsk, and an industrial zone was hit in Konstantinivka. In the early hours of January 1, Ukrainian forces fired rockets at a facility in Makiivka, also in the eastern Donetsk region, where Russian soldiers were stationed, killing dozens of them in one of the deadliest attacks on the Kremlin's forces since the war began more than 10 months ago. Also on Sunday, the Ukrainian military claimed to have hit a residential hall of a medical university in Rubizn, a town in the Russian-occupied eastern Luhansk region, killing 14 Russian soldiers housed there. The number of wounded was unknown, it said. Elsewhere in the east, Donetsk Governor Pavlo Kirilenko said 1 person was killed in strikes on Bakhmut, and 8 others were wounded. Attack on the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk missed its targets and there were no obvious signs of casualties, a Reuters reporter said on Sunday, after Moscow claimed the strike killed 600 Ukrainian soldiers. Russia's defense ministry, in a statement, said the strike on the buildings in Kramatorsk was a revenge operation for the deadly Ukrainian attack last week on a Russian barracks in Makiivka, in part of the Donetsk region controlled by Moscow's forces, in which at least 89 servicemen were killed. Moscow used what it called reliable intelligence to target the Ukrainian troops. More than 700 Ukrainian troops had been housed in one hostel and more than 600 in another. In Kramatorsk, residents in the populated area around the dormitories described the force of the explosion that rocked their homes overnight but said it was not out of the ordinary for the region, close to the Eastern Front. The residents said they heard explosions shortly after 11 p.m. local time, midnight Moscow time, when a ceasefire declared by Russia for Eastern Orthodox Christmas had been due to end. The Russian statement named 2 buildings, the dormitory of a site called College No. 47 and a dormitory affiliated with College No. 28, both in Kramatorsk. The College No. 28 dormitory was entirely intact. A crater lay about 50 meters away from it closer to some garages. Some of the college's windows were smashed. Pavlo Kirilenko, Ukraine's governor of Donetsk, had said earlier that Russia had launched 7 missile strikes on Kramatorsk. On Sunday, the defense forces of Ukraine shot down 3 Russian helicopters and 3 drones. In the course of the past 24 hours, Ukrainian aircraft carried out airstrikes on 10 areas where the enemy was concentrated and on 3 of its positions of anti-aircraft missile systems. In addition, Ukraine's defenders shot down 3 enemy drones, probably Orlan type, and 3 helicopters, MiG-24 and Ka-52. The type of one more helicopter is being clarified. At the same time, rocket forces and artillery units of the defense forces of Ukraine hit 2 areas of Russian military personnel concentration and fuel and lubricant storage points of occupiers. Russian troops are conducting offensive operations on the Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Lyman fronts, and are trying to improve the tactical position on the Kupiansk front. Occupiers are concentrating their efforts on capturing the Donetsk Oblast within the administrative border, but are having no success. In the course of the past 24 hours, Russia's forces launched a missile attack and 19 airstrikes. They have also shelled civilian infrastructure 10 times using missile launcher rocket systems. There were no significant changes on the Volyn, Polishcha, Syvershchina and Slobozhenskaya fronts. Certain military units of the armed forces of Belarus and Russia continue to carry out missions in Ukraine's border areas, and no formation of Russian offensive groups has been detected. At the same time, Russian troops are shelling positions of Ukrainian troops and civilian objects along the entire line of contact. On the Syvershchina and Slobozhenskaya fronts, the areas around the settlements of Kucherivka in Sumy Oblast, as well as Staritsia, Kolodyazin and Novomlinsk in Kharkiv Oblast came under Russian fire. On the Kupiansk front, Russian forces shelled the areas of the settlements of Pershatrivniv and Ivanivka in Kharkiv Oblast and Stelmakivka and Myasozorivka in Luhansk Oblast. On the Lyman front, Makiivka, Nevsk, Kuzmine, Chervopopivka and Dybrova in Luhansk Oblast. On the Bakhmut front, Berestov, Bilohorivka, Vasil, Rozdalivka, Bakhmut, Bila Ora, Dyliivka, Druzhba, Zalizn and New York in Donetsk Oblast have been affected by Russian shelling. On the Avdiivka front, Russian troops attacked Avdiivka, Nevelsk, Marinka and Novomykhailivka in Donetsk Oblast. On the Zaporizhia front, Russian forces shelled Dorozhnyenka, Chernihiv, Mali Sherbaki, and Kamiansk areas in Zaporizhia Oblast with tanks and an entire spectrum of artillery. On the Kherson front, occupiers continue shelling the settlements along the right bank of the Dnipro River. Kherson city has been hit by Russian missile launcher rocket systems once again. On January 5, Russia employed a unit of the country's National Guard Rosgvardia to shoot 6 Russian troops who had signaled their intention to surrender to Ukrainian forces near Chistopilya in the southern Zaporizhia Oblast, Ukraine's General Staff reported in its daily evening briefing. In November, the UK Defence Ministry reported that units of the Russian army had started deploying barrier troops, whose job is to prevent the retreat of Russian soldiers by threatening to shoot them. On December 16, The Insider reported that the shooting of deserters was common practices among units of Russian state-controlled paramilitary organization Wagner Group. Rosgvardia, an 340,000 force usually reserved for quelling internal unrest within Russia, has been documented to have played an active role in the invasion of Ukraine, participating in the failed offensives on Kyiv and Kharkiv in the early stages of the full-scale war. The report also said that Ukrainian forces shot down 3 Russian helicopters over December 8, including a Mi-8, a Ka-52 Alligator and an unspecified model, as well as 3 Orlan-10 drones. Ukraine was targeted by 1 Russian missile strike, 19 airstrikes and more than 10 attacks from multiple rocket launchers on Ukraine, including on civilian infrastructure, over January 8, the briefing said. The Russian army also continued to conduct offensives in the eastern Donetsk Oblast, in the Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Lyman sectors. The Russian military is concentrating its efforts to capture the entire Donetsk region within the administrative border, but without success, the report said. Head of Ukraine's presidential office Andriy Yermak reported on January 8 that 50 Ukrainian military personnel were freed from Russian captivity and returned to Ukraine in a prisoner exchange. Among those returned are reportedly 33 officers and 17 privates and sergeants. Yermak noted that those who were returned were part of Ukraine's armed forces, territorial defense units, naval forces, state border guard service, National Guard, and special operations forces. The released personnel were taken captive at the formerly Russian-occupied Kornabil nuclear power plant, as well as in Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Kherson oblasts. Some of them had defended the city of Mariupol and Bakhmut in Donetsk Oblast. At least 3,392 Ukrainian soldiers and civilians remain in Russian captivity as of January 3, according to Alyona Verbitska, the president's commissioner for protecting defenders' rights. These are the numbers that Russia has officially confirmed, she said. Ukraine retrieved nearly 1,600 prisoners of war in 2022, according to the Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories. In the recent prisoner exchange on December 31, 140 Ukrainians were freed from Russian captivity, according to the head of the president's office, Andriy Yermak. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced on January 8 that Russian forces conducted a retaliation operation against Ukrainian forces for the December 31 strike on Makiyivka that killed up to 400 mobilized soldiers due to Russian command failures and poor personnel dispersal practices. According to the Institute for the Study of War, the Russian Ministry of Defense falsely claimed the retaliatory strike targeted several temporary Ukrainian deployment points in Kramatorsk, Donetsk Oblast, and killed over 600 Ukrainian personnel. This claim is false. A Finnish reporter visited the strike site in Kramatorsk on January 8 and noted that it hit an empty school. On Friday, the U.S. announced a new $2.85 billion package of military aid for Ukraine, which will include tank-killing armored vehicles. The assistance was praised by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as exactly what Ukraine needed. In a separate message, Kadyrov wrote on Telegram that some 300 fighters from Chechen had been deployed to Ukraine. Russia claims the attack killed 600 Ukrainian soldiers. Reporters from the news agency visited 2 buildings Russia says were housing Ukrainian servicemen near the front line at the time of the overnight strike. Neither appeared to have been directly hit by missiles or badly damaged. There were no obvious signs that soldiers had been living there and no sign of bodies or traces of blood. The other building named by Russia's defense ministry was entirely intact. A crater lay about 50 meters away closer to some garages. In a statement, Russia's defense ministry said the strike was a revenge operation for a deadly Ukrainian attack last week on a Russian barracks in the Donetsk region, which killed at least 89 conscripts. As a result of a massive missile strike on these temporary deployment points of Ukrainian army units, more than 600 Ukrainian servicemen were destroyed. 2 power plants in the Donetsk region controlled by Russian forces were damaged in a rocket attack by the Ukrainian army, Moscow-installed officials said on Sunday. Initial information suggested that the plants in Zures and Novy Svit had been hit and that some people working there were injured, the officials said on Telegram. Since October, Russia has battered Ukraine's energy infrastructure with Iranian-made drones, knocking off power and water supplies for prolonged periods, during bleak winter conditions. An outdoor service was held in the Ukrainian capital's Independence Square for Major Ola Yurchenko, who was killed in Bakhmut on January 2. Fellow soldiers carried the coffin while others knelt on the ground. A bugle played and a male quartet later sang solemn hymns as an Orthodox priest conducted the service attended by about 200 people. Many Ukrainians spent the celebration crouched in underground shelters, as the 36-hour truce announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin passed by without hostilities letting up. The ceasefire, ordered by Moscow at midday on Friday, ended at midnight Saturday, 2100 hours Greenwich Mean Time. Ukraine accused the Russian army of not respecting the pause, while Russia claimed that Ukraine forced it to retaliate by not accepting the ceasefire. On Saturday, Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said the ceasefire was a ruse to gain time so that Russian forces could regroup. Washington, Paris, London, Berlin, and the EU all denounced Moscow's hypocrisy. An array of mostly unremarkable items stretched across 2 wooden tables on the far side of a cramped workshop in eastern Ukraine: double-sided tape, gloves, Allen wrenches, a soldering iron, 3D printed plastic, ball bearings, a digital scale. Next to them was a German DM-51 fragmentation grenade. They were all important ingredients for Ukrainian troops trying to piece together a puzzle. How do you create a grenade that weighs next to nothing but can be dropped from a drone and destroy a roughly 40-ton Russian tank? War is an economy. It's money, said Graf, a stout, bearded Ukrainian soldier in charge of his unit's drone team. And if you have a drone for $3,000 and a grenade for $200, and you destroy a tank that costs $3 million, it's very interesting. Since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine nearly a year ago, technological advancements on the battlefield have mostly centered on both countries' increased use of small, remotely operated drones and their growing importance in almost every aspect of the war, including reconnaissance, correcting artillery fire and so-called kamikaze attacks. The grenade, Graf said, should weigh around 1.1 pounds, the maximum weight a DJI Mavic 3 drone can carry without its flight being significantly disrupted. Ukraine has stayed ahead in the drone's arm race in much the same way as it has succeeded on the battlefield. Lower-level commanders have more leeway in how and when to use them, and drone units such as Graf's have less bureaucracy to navigate to test and deploy their weapons. Ukrainian forces are repelling constant Russian attacks on Bakhmut and other towns in the eastern region of Donbass, Ukrainian authorities said on Monday, after denying Kremlin claims of 600 soldiers killed in a missile strike. Russia launched 7 missile strikes, 31 airstrikes and 73 attacks from salvo rocket launchers in the past day, the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces said in a daily report. Ukrainian forces repelled attacks on 14 settlements, including Bakhmut, it added. Zelensky made a fresh denunciation of what he called Russia's failure to observe a truce it had proclaimed for Orthodox Christmas by staging attacks on Ukrainian cities. On Sunday, Russia said a missile attack on Kramatorsk, northwest of Bakhmut, had killed 600 Ukrainian soldiers, but a Reuters reporter at the scene found no obvious signs of casualties. Ukraine's top military officials said last week some 760 Russian troops had been killed or wounded in 2 attacks on Moscow-controlled parts of the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. These reports could not be independently verified. Oleksandr Syrsky, commander of the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, has visited Ukrainian positions near Bakhmut and Soledar in Donetsk Oblast. Bakhmut is holding out against all odds. And although most of the city has been destroyed by Russian strikes, our warriors repel constant attempts at a Russian offensive there. Soledar is holding out, although there is even more destruction and it is extremely hard. There is no piece of land near these 2 cities where the occupier would not have given his life for the crazy ideas of the masters of the Russian regime. This is one of the bloodiest places on the front line, the president said. Zelensky also emphasized that all our positions, all our actions in defense are interconnected, and the resilience and effectiveness of actions at the front in general depends on the resilience and effectiveness of actions at each area of the front line. On January 7, Serhiy Cherevatiy, the spokesman for the eastern group of Ukrainian troops, reported that the city of Soledar, Donetsk Oblast, is not under the control of Russian troops, and although fierce battles are taking place there, Ukraine's armed forces are repelling the attacks of the occupiers. The most recent report from the Institute for the Study of War, ASW, suggests that Russian occupation forces are far from an operational encirclement of Bakhmut, despite recent Russian gains in Soledar. Some 250,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian land, nearly 40% of all country's territory, have been mined since Russia's full-scale invasion last year, Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said in an interview with the South Korean news agency Yonhap. On December 8, the large-scale mining of Ukrainian land makes it difficult and highly dangerous for local farmers to grow crops and harvest, putting at risk the country's one of the vital industries. During the summer harvest, several farmers died in the Kharkiv and Sumy regions when their tractors hit a landmine during fieldwork. Earlier, the State Service for Emergency Situations reported that after the end of the war, Ukraine would need at least 10 years to demine its territory. Members of the National Guard of Russia shot 6 Russian soldiers near the settlement of Chistopilya in Zaporizhia Oblast on January 5. These soldiers were going to give themselves up into captivity to the defense forces of Ukraine. In order to strengthen the military discipline and to prevent the spread of panic among the military personnel of the occupying forces deployed on the Zaporizhia front, our opponents have activated several units of Russia's National Guard. It was revealed that on January 5, near the settlement of Chistopilya, 6 soldiers, who had the intention of giving themselves up into captivity, were shot. The General Staff reports that pursuing the goal of discrediting the Ukrainian military command, Russians are spreading disinformation about the defense forces of Ukraine allegedly planning to launch attacks on the medical institutions in Luhansk Oblast, where injured Russian soldiers are undergoing treatment. France's decision to send the AMX-10RC to Ukraine sparked pronouncements that the West is finally delivering tanks to Ukraine. That France and Ukraine have described the AMX-10RC as a light tank is significant. Despite Ukraine's pleas, the US and other countries have refused to send first-line tanks such as the M1 Abrams. This has left Ukraine reliant on a motley collection of Soviet-designed tanks acquired before the war, Russian tanks captured in battle, or refurbished models provided by countries such as Poland and the Czech Republic. The AMX-10RC is really a 6-wheeled armored car. Designed in the early 1970s and first deployed by the French Army in 1979, it is a 16-ton vehicle capable of traveling 50 miles per hour. France operates 245 AMX-10RCs and has deployed the vehicle in Operation Desert Storm and in counterinsurgency operations in Africa. Morocco, Qatar, and Cameroon also operate the AMX-10RC, though the French military is replacing it with the Jaguar, a 25-ton armored scout vehicle armed with a 40mm rapid-fire cannon and 2 anti-tank missiles. Wheeled armored scout cars are not uncommon. Russia, for example, still uses the 1960s-era 7-ton BRDM-2, Japan the 15-ton Type 87, and the US the 19-ton M1127 Stryker Scout variant. But what's striking about the AMX-10RC, and perhaps why it's been called a light tank or tank destroyer, is that it packs a 105mm cannon rather than the usual small cannon or heavy machine gun. While smaller than the high-velocity 120mm cannons found on main battle tanks, the AMX-10RC's gun is powerful enough to take out a tank at close range and would be deadly against lighter armored vehicles and infantry. France's announcement was quickly followed by the US announcing that it would send M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and Germany announcing that it would send Marder infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine. Both vehicles are tracked and heavier than the AMX-10RC but have smaller main weapons, though they also carry anti-tank missiles.